Hello and welcome to another edition of the Human Being Mental podcast. And today I'm joined by Sue Mahony. Welcome, Sue. How are you?
Hello, I am very well, and I'm absolutely loving seeing you because it has been a while
It's been a
since we last
little
saw one
while, hasn't
another.
it? I can see you there, pen poised in the hand, ready to write some
Uh,
notes.
I am, yes, I am.
Fantastic. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do, firstly, I think, because it's quite interesting and quite a current topic, I think.
Thank you. So I am a counsellor and coach for gifted people and neurodivergent people, and there's very often an overlap between those two groups of people. So
Okay.
when I say neurodivergent, I mostly mean autistic and ADHD because those are the people I specialise with.
hmm
Other neurodivergences tend to come along for the ride, like dyspraxia, dyscalculia,
hmm
dyslexia, lots of other things.
hmm hmm Okay. So what about the gifted people? How would you describe gifted people? The difference between
Oh,
the two? I know. Let's get straight into it, shall we?
let's like dive straight
Yeah,
in. That's
why
like
not? Why not?
we're going down to rebreather levels already.
Cool.
So gifted, what do you want me to say about giftedness? What it is,
Yeah,
or
yeah, I think it's a
angle?
term that's pretty much misunderstood as much as neurodivergency is, and I think it's good to kind of spell
Hmm.
the terms out for people to start with, so when they're listening, they
Yeah,
have an
lovely.
idea of what we're talking about when we refer to it later on. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
great. So, giftedness, as I use the term,
hmm
means that I'm looking at the top 1% of people in terms of their capability. And this is where it gets rather tricky to define
hmm
because the classic measurement is IQ.
hmm
That's the one that we've kind of all grown up with verbal reasoning tests, IQ tests.
Mm.
Are you a member of Mensa sort of
Yeah,
questions?
psychometric testing, all that kind of stuff as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All that jazz. But when you look at intelligence in a broader sense, there are lots of
hmm
different types of intelligences,
mm
and people can be gifted in one or more of those ways. So
Absolutely.
when I talk about giftedness, I'm talking about at least the top 1%.
hmm
And I say at least, well, I say, let me put it the other way around, at most the top 1%.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I
Okay.
understand you now. Yeah.
Because within giftedness, there are different levels of giftedness. You
hmm
can get people who are kind of smart in a sort of ordinary way. So
hmm
they can do everything, but just a little bit quicker. They grasp concepts more easily. They understand data and can process it more quickly.
So that's more
They're
like an
just,
academic way, you mean? Like a typical normal way you'd
yeah,
expect somebody to excel would be to be years ahead in school, maybe, doing degree level work at age 15 or something. There are people out there like that, aren't there? Is that what you're
yeah,
kind
for
of referring
sure.
to? Yeah.
Kind of. It's not that cut and dried.
Okay.
When you get to, as you know, talking about people,
Yeah.
when you start to really look at it, it becomes quite complex quite quickly.
mm mm.
And especially with giftedness, that's a big issue. Gifted people tend to have quite complex inner lives going on and have quite complex, not necessarily complicated, but complex experience of the world.
mm.
And when you get to I'm getting that intuitive thing I get, which is saying, don't talk about that yet. There's something else to say.
Ooh.
Or it could be the thing where it's like, no, Rich has got a question here. You got a
Mm.
question.
No, no. I was just
Oh,
wondering, actually, like the overlap was what I was just considering in the back of my mind as holding for
yeah,
something later on, like the overlap between gifted and neurodivergent. The two
yeah,
kind of seem to go hand in hand. I mean, if you think about, because I think about a gift as being almost like a skill that someone else doesn't have. So you think about people with autism quite often have like one very, very, very highly developed super skill that just comes very naturally to them. And the classic one
mm,
of that is like the example of Rain Man. When he sees all the matches fall on the floor, and I think it's matches in the film, isn't it? I can't remember. He sees them all fall on the floor. He just looks at them and he just spits a number out. That's 396 or whatever it was, and nobody thinks he's possibly able to do that. But surely they pick them up and count them, and there's 396 matches there. I've probably just completely bastardized that film, but do you know what I mean? That's a perfect example, I think, of how we in society ordinarily understand a gift to be for an autistic person. Can you think of any
I
other
think,
examples that might be a bit more relevant to what you're talking about?
well, I think before I address that question,
Mm.
what I want to look at is that that example, the Rain Man example, is one that comes up very frequently. And it's one that's quite unusual for autistic people. So when you look at the broad range of autistic people, not so many of them will be like that.
Okay.
So it's not a very useful representation of autistic people. Okay. And in fact, there's been a lot of underdiagnosis, particularly of autistic females and males who have non-typical presentation of autism, because they just get missed.
Yeah, I can believe it.
They just get missed. They get missed, and also they are quite often very good at what we call masking, which is where basically you pretend to be neurotypical. And so you're acting your way through the day, you're suppressing stims or tics and fidgeting, you're suppressing all of that. You're giving the appropriate responses, you're having a go at doing tone and conveying things, small talk, that kind of stuff. But it's not really who you are as a person. So you're having this like chronically inauthentic experience and presentation of yourself because you have to fit in, because if you don't at school, you kind of get treated unkindly, let's say. Yep. And in the workplace, people will kind of shun you a bit because you're a bit different. And by that, you're basically not responding to people as they expect you to. So neurotypical people will expect you to respond as a neurotypical person. And if you don't, then you're wrong. It's not their expectations are wrong, which is patently true. Their expectations are wrong because they're expecting a neurodivergent person to present neurotypically, which is hard to do. And it means that a lot of us get exhausted because we're acting all the time. And
it's hard keeping up a front, right? You know, it's hard keeping up a front of some sort in any situation. You know, it's not a long-term goal. And I was just thinking as well as, what does suppressing all that stuff do in the long term? You know, we all know what repression and suppression can do in the long term. It's dangerous road. I think, absolutely. You know,
absolutely. That kind of, there's the repression and suppression of emotions, which is one thing. There's also the repression and suppression of physical movement. So for autistic people and ADHDers in particular, there can be this need to move. So my hands are all over the place because they do that. Okay, this is part of how
struggling to stay centered on the camera sometimes. Me,
yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
And when I get happy, when I'm delivering workshops, I do neurodiversity training workshops for organisations. Okay, and when I get to a certain point where I feel like I've really hit my stride and I've just kind of settled into it and we've got a nice groove going on in the workshop, I start to rock gently. But the brilliant thing about doing a neurodiversity workshop is I can just say, hey, look, I'm rocking. That means I'm happy.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it just highlights what you're doing, you know.
Exactly.
Which is actually, that's something that we've just gone divergent already. What I wanted to do at the start was to ask you to introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do. And we've just dived straight into ADHD. So let's just underpin that for people to start with, because I think it's important to understand what you do. I mean, you've already hinted at the fact that you have some neurodivergent things going on yourself. So let's just have a little bit of what's Sue about and kind of what's Sue's background in all of this.
Okay, so the me bit is actually I started off in physics. So I read physics at Cambridge University. So you were talking before about intellectually, academically gifted people. That was me. I was kind of obviously bright all the way through school and went off into physics. But then I had there was this chronic sense of like something wasn't right with me. So there was this kind of academic success and also not being quite right. Then when I was in my degree, it was really funny. It wasn't very funny at the time, but it's funny looking back. It was the first time I'd had to work.
Okay. All
right. So I'd gone through school. I'd aced my GCSEs. I'd aced my A-levels. Basically, I'm good at doing exams and I'm good at sponging. So I will just sponge. And I'm also good at following instructions. So when I had a project or when there was a physics experiment I remember doing in my sixth form years, and I just followed the instructions and just bomb all the way through. And then I was finished before everybody else. And like it was a monitored, assessed, timed experimental process. And I just all the way through, got the results out, no problem. I'm good at following instructions, if I want to. There's the ADHD part kicking in. So when I got to university, it was hard.
It all of a sudden didn't come easy then, I'm guessing.
No, and I was like, how do I do this? How do I study? How and I didn't really.
How do I learn?
Yeah, it's like, well, the sponge technique just
it got you right through.
Yeah. So there's this point that gifted people often hit, and sometimes not till quite late on, of like, oh shit, how do I study? How do I learn? How do I apply myself in this kind of way when it doesn't come naturally, when it's not just automatic? I remember going to a psychologist once when I was 23. I saw her for one session. The reason will become clear. Because she described me as an overachiever. And I was just like,
I'm sorry, what?
No, achievement is like earned, and I didn't. I coasted and aced my exams. So in my view, that's not achievement. That's just like, yeah. So I only saw them for one session, but that session was useful in other ways. But there can be that sort of misunderstanding of like, if you're gifted, achievement comes easily. You don't have to work for it in that way. And then what turns up in therapy later on, for example, is people are awkward about like, how do you be gifted in a world which is not gifted? Because you're obviously quicker and brighter, and you can process like bigger, more complex and complicated systems and problems and find the solutions for those more easily than other people do. You don't have to sit there scratching your head and drawing diagrams for 3 hours. You just kind of go, well, it's this, isn't it?
I've done that my whole bloody life. I've done that my whole life, like literally problem solving like that, and looking at other people going, why is it taking you, like, why are you even thinking about that part? That part was null and void in my first stage of thinking, like gone.
Exactly.
You know, you're stuck there, and I'm like miles off down the road thinking about another thing now, you know, it's like.
That's it.
But you feel alone in that. There's a loneliness in that, Sue, as well, isn't there? Do you know, because nobody else really, it's hard to associate with other people like that because you don't really find each other very easily. But when you do, oh my God, it's like fireworks going off, because all of a sudden you're able to think out loud with somebody else who's like you.
Shall we tell the story?
Yeah, go on. Okay. I'll let you tell it. You've got a better memory than me. So
you and I, we met on the counselling skills course we were doing in Exeter.
Correct.
And this was 9 or 10 years ago. God, so we're both sporting a little bit more salt and pepper than we used to.
Absolutely.
And we kind of go around in the group, and then you have these icebreaker exercises. And we had this icebreaker exercise, which we basically just bundled through in the first 30 seconds. Let's put that aside and now hang around and have a chat with each other.
Let's get to know who each other is. It was just like, it was hilarious.
It was just gorgeous. It was just like this kind of sparky, interesting, like, hey, this is a really cool person to get to know. I want to get to know them kind of vibe.
I think in the first 3 minutes, we'd covered the meaning of life, spirituality, what we thought about music. It was just like bang, 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 bang. You know what I mean?
Totally.
It was incredible. It was incredible.
And then we bonded over being litter vigilantes. Of people throwing stuff out of their car windows and us throwing it back in.
That's right.
So that's how we met. And one of the first things, and one of the most enjoyable moments from that course I remember, is when we were doing this mirroring exercise, physical mirroring, and everybody was paired up, and you and I were paired up for that. And what I loved in that was the playfulness that we had and the challenge. And within the first few goes, we were pushing each other, we were teasing each other, we were winding, we were doing fainting moves.
Absolutely. Trying to catch the other one out, just having fun. Just
gorgeous. And that sort of combination of like the intellectual challenge and the physical challenge together is just so my hands are doing this, which is what they
That's
do.
where
And
the
it's just like,
creativity comes in, you know.
it's just scrumptiously gorgeous. Yeah. So
I'm sure if
that's
Sean
how we
is
met.
watching this, that would have lit him up listening to that then, because that's exactly what we had with him doing the creative course, and you would have been a person who would have excelled on that course as well, because it was experiential. You know, it wasn't learning by learning; it was learning by experience.
Yeah.
That's the best way, I think, for, as far as I can work out, for anybody who's neurodivergent. Learning through play is almost essential. It's almost the cornerstone of learning, full stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And learning experientially, I think, is so important, especially for gifted people, as well as other types of neurodivergent people. And I do classify giftedness as a type of neurodivergence because it's so different.
Good, yeah. I'm glad you said
and
that.
It's so minority as well, particularly when you get into the more complex levels of giftedness, because it's a different way that the brain works. It's like, okay, there's ordinary giftedness where you're kind of faster and you sort of excel at the normal stuff. But then there's this higher, or there's the official terms for it is highly gifted, exceptionally gifted, and profoundly gifted. And if you're in one of those three levels, as opposed to mild or moderately gifted, those three levels are more to do with, like, you just have this complex way of thinking, and your thinking has like wormholes through it, so you can sort of warp speed across whatever you're thinking about to connect things. And that's why we can solve problems so quickly, and that's why we can connect and synthesize ideas with not much effort, because our brains are just like so that has its problems. Go on, ask me questions.
I was going to say, why do you think gifted people and learning experientially is so much more essential than it is for somebody who, say, I hate the term, but neurotypical? I mean, I mentioned the word neurodivergent with Sean, and he kind of made the comment of it's a really useful umbrella term because we haven't had anything like that holds everything together before. But at the same time, he doesn't like the term because it alludes to the fact that there is a neurotypical, which he doesn't think exists. And I'm inclined to kind of agree with him, do you know? Because I don't like the idea of normal, or there being one way of human beings having to be. You know, I hate this idea of typical, because we're all beautifully diverse and different. That's just the way I see the world, you know?
What I would love to see, Rich, is academic research on the population. How many gifted people do we actually have? How many neurodivergent people, and what combinations do we actually have? Because at the moment we don't have the statistical basis with that level of thoroughness.
How many people are still either hiding it or don't realize they have any kind of giftedness or neurodivergence, or you know, I mean, God, it took me till I was 40 to even consider it. And then, you know, another couple of years for me to actually process it and accept it, you know, and it was a bit of a bombshell for me, I've got to admit, in my 40s, suddenly realising that, oh my God, that's why every school report said Richard could do so much better if he just applied himself. But then in the subjects I was interested in, I would do really well at, you know, it was and everybody was scratching their heads, and I'm thinking, God, if that was my child now in this day and age, I would be thinking, there might be something going on with your brain that's affecting your learning differently. But of course, back when I was at school in the 80s and 90s, I'm showing my age now terribly, but when I was back at the school back in those days, you know, none of that was in awareness for teachers or parents or anybody else around. So of course it wasn't spotted, or very rarely spotted. You would have had, I remember kids in my class being dyslexic for sure. That was picked up very rarely, but picked up. Autism just wasn't picked up at all. And all the kids who had what we would now just describe as neurodivergency or learning difficulties or learning disabilities or whatever were all thrown together in the remedial classes. And that was the way the education system worked, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull us back to the experiential learning piece.
Please do, because I've gone off on one.
So the experiential piece is because to really get to grips with the subjects, it needs to be embodied. Okay, and you'll find this, you know, with your counselling experience. If somebody's just in their head when they're in a session and there's no processing going on, they're just there's talking about it, but there's not talking from it or in it or
Exactly.
connected with it.
Yes.
And when you've got the experiential learning going on, because academic learning, book learning, video learning, audio, whichever other ways you sponge your information in is so easy, experiential learning kind of, it's a bit Heineken, gets to the places that the normal book learning doesn't get to. That helps to, for a terrible turn of phrase here, that helps to round you out kind of thing.
It does.
It doesn't at all. We're all kind of unusual shapes, but it helps to take that learning deeper. So I do a lot of gardening. That's one of my things. And the number of lessons I get from my garden is just like huge. I've got some tadpoles. My garden's just out that window.
Oh, okay.
So if I'm looking that way, it's because
you're looking in the garden.
Exactly. I've got some tadpoles in my pond there. This is fake. If you haven't realised already that this is fake, this is fake. The tadpoles have been a great lesson in like nature's abundance and why nature produces so many tadpole spawns. So the frog spawn bundle is like hundreds of little eggs, and then the tadpoles are out there in my pond, and it's a limited sized pond. And there's a magpie that comes and fishes tadpoles out, and it was a real teaching, just me watching these tadpoles and thinking about it and kind of like getting a bit hippie and sort of communing a bit with the tadpoles and the pond and stuff. And it was this real lesson of like, nature is abundant and a few frogs will make it, and that is all fine because that's all we need. And the tadpoles that are the magpie food, that's great. The magpies have their food, they go on and do their thing. And it went in at a deeper level than just theoretically going, oh yeah, the circle of life does this and and nature has redundancy and blah blah blah. But it went in more because I was kind of there with my tadpoles and with my pond. So the experiential stuff, you mentioned like the creativity and when we were describing the exercises we were doing on the course together, that kind of creativity gives a different part. My body twists when I'm trying to get words out that I haven't quite found yet. It's like I'm sort of squeezing them out of the archives in my shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for me, language is very important. I like to be very accurate with my language, unless I get overexcited, in which case I'm not.
Language is embodied, isn't it? You know, we move and we verbalize and vocalize with our bodies, you know, as much as we do our voice, and we pick that up when we're reading other people too. So I think it's, you know, having that awareness that you do that as well is excellent. You know, knowing what you're doing when you're doing that, when you're trying to squeeze that word out, just, you know, that's amazing.
Sometimes it's like a shape of a word or something, but it was, anyway, I've forgotten what I was talking about now. But ADHD brains, we do this, we go and explore things, and then we forget what we're talking about, and then we just carry on because something else is
talking about learning by experience, learning experientially. You know, and I was thinking about the richness of that, and how as a neurodivergent person, like learning in that way is more information rich than it is reading, because you know, reading is it's okay, but it's boring. You know, and I've always been a great reader. I've loved reading, but if a book doesn't grip me, I'm gone. See you later. You know, it needs to grip me.
Where the sensory sensitivity can come in as well. So a lot of people who are neurodivergent and gifted have sharper senses. We see more, we smell more, we taste more, we hear more. We're more affected by our sensory imprint, and what's going on in our bodies can be really important. You know, there's the classic kind of autistic itchy label thing, cut all the labels out your clothes, please do it. And seams, and some, like I am quite particular about what fabrics I want or don't want. It needs to be nice. So when you've got that sensory richness and abundance, a lot of consequences then come from that. One, you're hungry. You know that things can be like scrumptiously gorgeous and you want it more. So you can get hungry for sense input. It's very easy to become deprived of sensory input, and then not notice what that kind of restless, niggly itchiness is in your body. Is I just feel wrong, and it's like, oh, it's because I need to go and look at some blue sky,
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
You need to change it up, I think, is the thing
exactly.
that I hear quite a lot from people I speak to who have autism, is the need to not stay in one place for too long with something, to constantly have like a, not constantly, but to regularly have a change of environment, a change of input, a change of sources of input seems to be quite
Mm.
a common thing for people. And I
Did
wonder if,
you
if
did you
that's
mean
a,
autism or did you mean ADHD there, or a bit of
um,
both? Because it
probably
can
a bit of
co-occur.
both, actually. Probably a neurodivergent thing in general.
Hmm.
I would thinking about it. I was
Yeah,
thinking more of a couple of people I've spoken to recently with autism who've spoken to me about that. But I think, yeah, you are right. Having said that, it probably
yeah,
is more of an
yeah,
under the whole umbrella kind of thing.
yeah. And I think where it comes to with creativity is because we experience the world differently and
Mm,
more richly in
mm,
some ways. That can lead to you've got different set of resources to draw on when you're then creating because your experiences are different. And being able to paint, I'm coming back to the words thing now, of being able to be just very specific with language. And there are some authors who are just exquisite in their writing, that it unlocks something. And I think that it takes a certain kind of mind to do that.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I was thinking about, when you read something that's absolutely brilliant, that just captures you from start to finish. Whether that's an academically written book or a novel or what, it doesn't matter. It's the beautiful use of language that you've just described there to articulate something in a way that nobody else can.
Hmm.
And I think when you read that, it doesn't matter whether you're neurodivergent or not. You pick up on that. You pick up on the
Yeah.
uniqueness of it, and
Yes.
the way that it's been arranged in such a way that it elicits something within you. It's a beautiful part of creativity, and probably something that's responsible for a lot of the incredible music and poetry and art and everything else, the sculpture, dance, everything else that's out there. As I wonder
Hmm.
whether that has come from a place of neurodivergence a lot of the time.
It's a good question to ask. And the
Mm.
academic side of myself, um, I never finished my introduction, did I? But never
No, you
mind.
didn't. No, no, that's fine. We'll do that as we're going along.
So, so after my physics and other things, I was a maths teacher for a while. Did not fit the classroom. Left
Mm.
that. Took a recovery job for a year. Then went into doing a environmental sciences PhD. So that appreciation for the academic and research and wanting to have robust stats and robust findings out of things
Mm.
is very much a part of how I've come to where I am now. And I would love there to be some really good research on this. Like, what is the interplay of neurodivergence and
Mm.
creativity? And how can we help people to do that more? And
Yeah.
coming at it from a therapeutic sense, sometimes we're looking at helping people to heal from the past so that they can do bigger, brighter, better, more in touch, in tune with themselves going forward.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and then how to open that up. And if there are shortcuts, I love a shortcut. So
It
if there
doesn't
are
love a
shortcuts
shortcut.
if there are shortcuts to be able to help people to do that, then I've just been introduced to brain spotting in the last few months. Have you come across brain spotting
No,
before?
I haven't.
Oh my
I
gosh,
haven't.
it is gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous. So it works on and I'm not talking as an expert, I'm just talking as somebody who has read and digested a book and had a few brain spotting
No,
sessions.
no, that's cool. Please introduce me
And
and everybody else to it, because I'm sure there's others as well.
I experimented with it with myself. So brain spotting works on the basis that when you're talking about something, particularly when you're talking about something important to yourself,
Hmm.
you tend to gaze. So people will gaze at certain, spot on the floor, spot on the ceiling, spot on the wall, spot outside, desk, whatever. The gaze is related to the content.
Okay.
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 Now, how this actually was discovered came through EMDR. Somebody was practicing EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. It's a
That's it. Yeah.
very well-known
Hmm.
technique for dealing with trauma, particularly PTSD. Not so effective for PTSD, for complex PTSD, but is quite effective in helping to release some trauma memories. And what the guy, a chap called David Grand, who developed the brain spotting technique, what he noticed in a client session was that there was a real kind of sharp activation point at one point, and he just held that point. So instead of scanning and keeping the eyes moving, he just held that point. And what happened was this sort of, I'm going to explain how I experience it when I'm doing brain spotting. It's like layers unlock.
You were in the middle of explaining brain spotting before we got rudely disconnected by the internet.
So the brain spotting, so I was talking about in my experience when I'm working with a brain spot, and it's like I get layers of experience. So memories, it'll be thoughts, it'll be beliefs, it'll be pictures of things that I've gone through. I'm quite a visual person in my brain, so it'll be like a little photograph of what happened. And it just kind of goes flip, 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 flip. And it can be faster and slower. But essentially it takes me back through to like the root of whatever the problem was.
Okay. So it's like a wormhole in that sense. Yeah. Then. I love it. That's amazing.
And what I love about it, I get really excited about it because brain spotting, when I've done it either by myself or been led through by my therapist, it's like we just go and press all the buttons.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. Oh.
And it's gorgeous because you can not only go into like the difficult side and releasing the difficult stuff, but you can also tap into what you call your resource side, where you go to, well, what would it be like if this problem is solved and I have access to that part of me that I haven't got access to right now?
Yep.
My creativity, my love, my power, my strength, my whatever. If I've got access to that, you then find the brain spot associated with that and work with that. And then you can kind of like, you can tap into things.
So it's like really, because you mentioned thoughts and feelings and a couple of other things in there as well. So it's almost like you're drawing in all of the senses that were related to one, I guess, train of thought, or maybe train of thought is probably the wrong word. I'm looking for another word, but I can't think what it is right now.
It's like a theme. And a friend of mine gave me this. She described how a database was explained to her, and a database was explained to her as a like index cards, which with punch holes round, and if it fitted a certain category, it had that punch hole in a certain place. And then the database is like sticking a knitting needle through, a database lookup, stick a knitting needle through, it goes through all of the holes, and where it's a hole, it can lift it up, but where it's been punched out, so the hole is incomplete, it can't lift that card up. So it's a bit like a brain spot is a database. Yeah,
that makes sense now. That's a really good analogy for it, actually. And then I like that.
Yeah. And I love doing brain spotting, so yes, I think I'm going to train in it. But I have to make a lot of decisions about what I'm training next. What am I training in next? Wow, that's the whole rabbit hole of things. Give me another rabbit hole to dive into.
What are you doing at the moment? Tell people what you do, because you mentioned kind of running workshops and doing kind of bits and pieces in the commercial sector. So tell the people what you do, because you run a private practice as well as a counsellor?
I have a private practice, yeah.
Yeah, so tell everybody a little bit more about that.
So I offer coaching and counselling for gifted, neurodivergent and highly sensitive people, and people who think they might be, and people who are not quite sure if they are, but have resonated really strongly with the stuff on my website, so they think that's worth a shot. Usually they are, because that's why they're resonating.
Funny enough.
And it's kind of everything that like therapy and counseling usually are. So it's processing stuff, it's unlocking doors inside yourself so that you can get on and do things. It's being able to put things to bed properly. Like a lot of people come in and not having completed a grief process of some sort or other. So the grief process, the one that has jumped into my head right now, is the grief process that most people with uteruses will go through when they hit menopause if they haven't had children, regardless of whether they wanted children or not. There is a grief process to accompany that physiological change. And that's just there. And if you go through menopause without doing that grieving, or if you haven't grieved it before, like you might say you were in your 30s and you decided, I'm not having kids, you go through a grief process then. And I think another one kicks off. I have got a kid, so I don't know it from experience, but there will be a grief process or processes involved in those physiological changes, and whether or not you've gone through pregnancy and abortion and pregnancy and birth or whatever your story has been. So some people will come in with grief, but dealing specifically with gifted and neurodivergent clients, there are all the things that you were going through my top 10 list right at the start. You're like, yeah, it's kind of lonely, isn't it? Because nobody's like you. And it's like, yeah, it's lonely because nobody's like you. And there's this sort of chronic friction between what people expect you to be like and what you're actually like. And dealing with people's responses can sometimes be quite challenging. Where people are kind of like, wow, you're so smart. It's like, how do you deal with that? Nobody gives you tips on like how to deal with that kind of thing. No. I was in a place once and it was like, I was introduced as, this is Sue. She's probably the most intelligent person in the room. And it was a room of like 40 people and anything from their 30s through to 70s. And I was just like, where do I go now?
Yeah, where'd you go from that?
Like,
set the bar high.
And it's like those sorts of like how to handle that gracefully. How do you do the conversation at that point? It's just like swallow you up moment. Where do you go with that? So being gifted is that experience of being very, very different in a particular way. And even when you're around other gifted people, there's the kind of like, do we overlap here? Yeah. Do we overlap? We can overlap on some things. And then the presumptions that come with giftedness. So some people think that all gifted people are like really ethical, super high value, in terms of they've really thought through their values and things like that. It's like, no, some people are not like that at all, let's say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the challenges of like not really fitting in anywhere. So it's like the questions of fit and belonging, and how do you experience connection with people when people can't connect with you in those parts of yourself that are so important? So can people connect with you in your giftedness, or do they just admire it or be slightly unnerved by it from a distance?
Yeah, that's really important, I think. Really important for people to realize that I mean, what you're talking about there are actually things that a lot of human beings struggle with without being gifted or neurodivergent, finding connection, finding meaning. I think if you're neurodivergent, it must be so much more difficult, especially if you are gifted and you feel like you're separated away from society for no fault of your own, just for being a bit more clever than everybody else, for want of a better word. That's the loneliness. People quite often look at those who excel and think it must be fantastic being so amazing, but actually it can be a really lonely place. Really lonely place. So,
really lonely place. And especially when like we've both got experiences of the could do so much more kind of thing.
Could do better if you applied yourself. Yes.
Could do better if you applied yourself. Now, I could have done better in my degree had I known how the hell to apply myself, and maybe had some of the executive functioning to be able to do that. So there's that kind of like tension of like always feeling like you're failing because you're not meeting this mythical potential, and actually you're excelling and feeling like you're failing at the same time. And it's like, what does that do for somebody's sense of identity and self-esteem?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit of a mind mess. So specializing in giftedness and neurodivergence is helping people through those particular lenses of understanding how that helps or doesn't help or gets in the way or is a factor in or plays a role in all these other experiences that they're having. You mentioned something really important, which is late diagnosis. When people come to a diagnosis in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s, the process that we go through at that point, and my own diagnosis history was, everyone knew I was bright at school, so that was like a no-brainer. I figured out I was autistic when I was about 30, and I figured out I was ADHD when I was 40 something. It was just a small number of years ago. So let's just say 40 because that's a nice round number.
It's about the same for me.
Yeah. And I figured out the high sensitivity somewhere in between the autism and the ADHD, but now I understand it's just part of those. For me, it's part of those. What's been fascinating is in the last 2 years, especially, I've revisited what it means to be gifted. And I'm just coming to the end of a giftedness for psychologists course with the Intergifted group who are based in Zurich in Switzerland, which is all about the particular issues that gifted people have, which has both been a massive personal journey of looking back and going, oh, that's how my giftedness alongside the autism and the ADHD played a role in my family relationships, in my friendships, in my experience of school, in my experience of extracurricular activities, in my experience at university, in the, it's the luxury problem of having too many options.
And I was just thinking, in literally everything, it literally affects everything. Excuse me, I haven't developed a tick or anything. I'm being plagued by flies, so that's why you see me swatting and moving every so often. I'm trying to shut them off me.
I haven't noticed. My normal world is full of people moving erratically. So,
oh dear. Yeah, I've got the windows open because it's nice and warm here today, and all of a sudden there's like 20 flies just come in and just suddenly gone, oh, we like you.
You smell nice.
They smell nice, yeah, obviously. So I want to ask you, there's a bit of a theme going on in society at the moment of awakening. Lots of people talking about awakening and having awakening experiences. And it's something that with the podcast I'm doing a little bit of exploration on, and I've had my own periods of awakening in my life, and so have a lot of my friends, and so have a lot of clients I've worked with too. And I wanted to talk to you about that and get your take on whether you think that is a big factor in the work you do with people as clients. I can say honestly, I was saying this to somebody else the other day, I think one of the unintended consequences of people coming into therapy is that they end up coming out of it more awake, which means being more in touch with themselves, being more aware, being more compassionate, all of these things that kind of tie into being awake. Is that something that you see happening with neurodivergent clients as well? Is that a commonality too?
Oh, this is a delicious question and topic. Thank you. I love this.
No problem.
Because I'm going to draw some definitions straight away. So
Please
there's awake with a little a, then we have awake with a capital A, and then we have enlightenment. Let's go all in here.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. I like that.
So people wake up to the reality of themselves. People wake up to themselves and people reconnect with themselves. That is what therapy helps people do if they want to. And sometimes if they don't want to, because, if I say to you 2, 4, 6, 8,
10.
Sorry?
12. Yeah. 10, 12. Yeah.
So what happens is you start to have these patterns and people recognize the patterns in their world, and then they're like, oh, if this and this and this and this and that and that and that. And that can be, there can be unintended consequences. Just like in meditation, there can be unintended consequences. Some people are really good at meditation and they end up in these really deep states, like super fast. And then they're like, oh, fuck. And I laugh because it's like ridiculous and absurd, but it's also, it can be horrifying and terrifying. Like your identity collapses, your understanding of the world collapses, and it's just like, it really is, oh fuck. It's not just like, oh fuck. It's serious. It's serious. There's also, I've laid out my sort of awake, enlightened kind of thing. And there's also a side angle to this as well. There's a side
Okay.
angle. So there's the awake to the reality of things. There's also the spiritual awakening side of things,
Glad
which
you mentioned that word. Thank you very much. Awesome.
which is it's me. It's gonna come up. I am Dr. Sue with the woo. So here we go. Although I have to
That's fantastic.
love it, hey?
Dr. Sue with the woo. I love that.
And I'm going to put my standard disclaimer that I have a non-medical doctorate, so I use it here purely for humorous purposes. I am not a medical doctor and have not gone through that whole process, which is an MD, not a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
So, spiritual awakening, people become awake to quite often on the first level, they become more awake to their intuition, which is going to happen if you're doing stuff to become more in tune with your body, to be more aware of what your body is telling you, to be more aware of what your thoughts are actually doing and saying. And then suddenly one day a thought comes in and it's a different, it's just like a different note. It's like you have an orchestra and normally your thoughts sound like the string section and you get a trombone coming in and you're just what the why? Yeah, okay. And then at that point, some people go, no, I don't want that. And they block it out. And other people, they're more curious and liable to press buttons, people go and explore it. And they're like, whoa, that was a cool trombone. How did that trombone happen? I want to make that trombone happen again. Is it just trombones I get, or do I get trumpets as well? Can I get a tuba?
Which button do I have to press for a bassoon?
Oh my gosh, wind section. Let's go there. Clarinet, here we come.
Exactly. That's brilliant. I love that analogy. That's so gorgeous.
So that is pleasure. I love metaphors, and I love that is one thing I love about my brain. It gives me the most, and I'm not sure if it's just my brain or other people contributing as well, which is a whole other spiritual awakening thing. I do get a lot of metaphors coming through. I do love them and appreciate them very much. So your intuition wakes up, and
So this is awake with a little a. This is
yeah. And what I love as well is it kind of, we could stray off into a stray off. It's not straying off. It's all part of the fabric of the woke thing at the moment. Okay. Because being woke basically means being respectful of people's experience and being respectful that people, you know, we're sitting here as two white people. People of color will have a different experience of walking through the world. People who are in the LGBTQIA plus community have a different experience of walking through the world. People who are disadvantaged in different ways have a different experience of walking through the world. And being woke means being respectful of those experiences and those differences, not the kind of handy label that the right-wing press throw out to discredit anybody who is trying to be respectful of somebody else.
I think it's the same as a lot of things, Sue, and it's a polarization extreme. You know, that being woke is not a bad thing, but being woke when you're arguing all sorts of crazy things that are, you know, basically a lot of attention seeking goes on and a lot of hype by the media goes on, and then you've got yourself a situation that's blown out of all proportion where a word suddenly means nothing that it was meant to mean in the first place.
Exactly.
Which is where we're at with woke now. And if you look at the woke culture in the media, it's polarized arguments about, you know, many different things, gender being one of them, and that's not helpful. So I'm glad you identified woke and explained it in that way for people, because I think it's useful to understand the true origins of words. And woke is one of those words that is going to be pretty rapidly reowned, I think, because there's nothing wrong with having feelings. There's nothing wrong with talking about feelings. You're not a snowflake if you're woke, you know, and I hate that kind of word anyway, you know. It gets banded together and turned into something bad and used as a label to discredit people, and it's not useful.
Absolutely.
So thank you for explaining it in that way, because that was beautifully succinct.
Pleasure. We were at awakening and spiritual awakening and intuition.
Yes.
When you become more aware of what's going on for you and more connected to your own human experience, I don't know how possible it is to ignore other people's human experiences. And
Yeah.
similarly to how to ignore the experience and what's happening with nature. You know, I was talking about my tadpoles earlier. You become much more aware of things going on. I've got some robins that have been nesting in the garden. There's some goldfinches that have come in. Yesterday I had this fledgling woodpecker. It's like just
Wow.
come and flomp around, you know, like they do, these little
Wow.
fledglings. They haven't quite got strong
Yeah.
legs yet, so they sort of bottom out a lot.
That's
And
amazing.
it was just in my garden, and then it had some of my ants, and then my ants, the garden's ants, and then it just flew off. I was quite happy to see it had wings and could use them. But you become more aware when you're more in tune and in touch with your and connected to your own humanity. Um, and by humanity, I just mean the experience of being human, because humanity can be like humanity, but
Hmm.
it's not. It's human experience. You become more aware of nature experience, animal experience, the global experience, what's going on.
Absolutely.
And there's that awakening on that sense as well. You become more aware of what's going on, and you become more bothered by it as well. And again, people have choices. Some people will just kind of go, yeah, don't want to see, don't want to know, shut me away.
Can't deal with it. Switch it off. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
And other people will like run hell for leather straight into it, and some people find a middle ground. You know.
I'm like, that's me. The other one. Run hell for leather straight into
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
You know.
I don't really know how to do middle ground.
No. No. Me either.
So,
Me either.
so yeah, so there's awakening in those senses. So that's our territory. That's our territory.
Bring the spiritual into it for me.
Bring the
Like
spiritual in. Okay,
a
so
spiritual awakening as opposed to what you've already described.
okay, so a spiritual awakening is like you kind of go, okay, body awareness of senses sort of thing. Then you go intuition. Okay, fine. Then you go into fields like psychic. You go into fields like near-death experiences. You go into areas of communication between people without communicating. That's an interesting one.
So we're
And
heading into Sheldrake territory here,
and then
which I
you go,
love, by the way.
yeah. And then you go into territory like, you know, I jokingly referred to myself as sort of, if you were a hippie, I would be communing with my pond. I was actually communing with my pond.
You
I
must
am
be a
that
hippie. Nothing wrong
I
with
am
that.
that hippie.
Nothing wrong with that. Love the pond.
I have felt like a closet hippie for so many years, and I'm squeaked open.
Time
and
for you to
put
come
wardrobe
out,
away.
Sue. Come out to the world live on the Human Being Mental podcast. I am a hippie. I
No,
invite you
sorry.
to come out.
I sort of I come
One
out of my
of
closet
us,
and then I
one
go
of
back
us.
into it. I'm like this with my doors. They're like, sometimes they'll probably hit me in the face.
This is the danger.
So
This is the
with
danger.
spiritual awakening, my own experience of it is that before I went to uni, I had some experiences of dreams that were precognitive. So the dream and then the thing happened. And while I was at uni, I had some particularly strong experiences of this around about my second year, of a dream that actually completely came true. Like
What age would you have been roughly?
19.
19. Yeah.
But before that, I'd also had other dreams that had exactly come true, a small number. I also had some.
What was that like for you, by the way?
It's like
What was that like? Was that scary as shit, or was it? You know.
I'm very much in the category of like, that's interesting. Like,
Okay, so it wasn't like a terrifying experience.
No,
for you,
I'm
then.
there
Okay.
going like, that's interesting. I don't. I for various reasons, me and fear are kind of like I don't notice it. So, yeah, sometimes I do anxiety and I do tension quite well, but I'm very much like ooh, how did that happen and can I make it happen again kind of person.
Yeah, exactly.
So which has its consequences.
It certainly does. It certainly does.
So for me, there were dreams, and I had some very clear experiences of deja vu. And when you have it, it's such a real experience that you're not making it up, but it's quite hard to convince some people about it, but never mind. And I also had this very clear experience one Sunday morning. I remember it being quite a nice day outside, and it was a Sunday morning, and rather unusually my dad shouted for my mom very loudly and said, "Come and look at this." And it was probably the TV or something like that. And I was upstairs in my bed, no TVs around, and I couldn't hear the TV. I couldn't, like, the words or anything. And all I heard from my dad was that, "Come and look at this." And in my head, bang, Diana's dead.
Bloody
and
hell.
I was like, "That's weird. That's weird." And I went downstairs, and that was the news of the day unfolding.
Bloody hell.
And I was like, whoa, how did that? I was a bit freaked out by that one.
Yeah.
But it was also it was then when I went into my physics
you were like, how
degree,
did that happen?
But then when I was in my physics degree and I was there in amongst my sort of quite straight-laced, hard-headed, not everybody, but quite straight-laced, hard-headed, rational scientist folk. But I have this experiential knowledge and grounding of deja vu, precognitive dreams. And how the hell did I know that? So there's this, when you have that your own experience of something, you can argue with it if you like. That's called dissociation, suppression, and repression. That's a viable option. But it also made me
part of reasoning
aware that when I'm talking about physics and materials and science, I knew there was this part of experience that was not in that. Yeah, and that's
something else going on. There's something else going on there. Yeah.
And it becomes kind of unshakable. You know that you did not make it up. You know. So that was kind of always there as a thing. And then various things happened that I went through a particular thing that I'm not ready to talk about yet. I will be at some point, but not yet. I went through a particular set of events, and a lot of my skills came online. So I'd been going for shiatsu treatments, and I was able to feel where she was going to put her hands next. I could predict it, even if it had not been a line or a channel that she'd worked on before. And I would have strange sensations happen in my body. She would be working on my right arm, and my left arm would feel like it was this sort of inflated sausage.
Wow.
Like, what am I feeling here? And how am I feeling this? And it's like the scientists, like, let's go and investigate it.
Yeah, let's look at that. Yeah, definitely. Now I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So I'd had so many of these sorts of experiences, and then as the years went by, I go and poke more buttons and find more things.
Yeah, why not?
So one of the experiences that happened probably just about before we met was I started to have mediumship experiences.
Okay.
And, that was a whole new world because then it's like, well, how do I turn it on and how do I turn it off? And how, what number do I need to dial kind of thing? So there's a lot of, how do you manage this stuff? There's a brilliant book, which anybody who's listening in and watching this, who thinks they need this kind of thing, get this book. It is exactly this. It's called Managing Psychic Abilities, and it's by Mary Schutan, and she wrote it from the perspective of somebody who has psychic abilities and doesn't know what the fuck to do with them. Okay?
That's a great perspective.
Because you go to the library, you go to the bookshop, you go to your favorite online bookseller, and you go, psychic abilities, and it's how to become psychic, how to develop your psychic abilities, how to and it's from the perspective of somebody who doesn't have it, who would like to. And if you've got this stuff just happening, you kind of need a training manual.
Yeah, you kind of want something that's working at a bit of a deeper level than the lead up to, because you've already gone past that unintentionally and got right into full on doing it.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And there's a lot of safety criteria here, because it's this is very much informed by Mary's writings and through working with her, and I've trained with her in various things as well. But it's like when you start encountering the spirit world, you encounter spirits, you encounter intelligences, and some of them have your best interests at heart, and some of them don't give a poop about you.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
And some of them are out to, like, wind you up and or whatever it might be. They're out for a bit of a laugh, like, haha, can we make this one do blah blah blah, sort of thing. So, when you go into the spirit world or start communicating with it, you sort of need a bit of either a guide, or you need your wits about you, or you need some boundaries of who you're prepared to communicate with and what for and when. And, there's a very ridiculous experience that is coming to mind, but I'm not sure whether to share it or not.
It's always a question of how tightly do I hold my own boundaries, and my brain goes, no, say it. And my brain, no, don't say it.
But there are also some experiences that we can have as humans. So meditation is one of them, that can take us into particular states where we can have more going on. So I've definitely had, let's say, assistance in processing some of my stuff when I've been in meditative states. I see things, and it's really, I'm not sure how I would have done that work in just like plain vanilla human basic world
ordinary life. I get you.
So that kind of spiritual awakening can happen for people in that kind of gradual way of developing body intuition and then sort of starting to having experiences. It can go the other way around. There are lots of different ways into this. Some people are mediums and psychics from childhood, and they never switch it off. It's just a thing they have always done and always been able to do. And quite often it runs in families. So it will be like, little Alfie is seeing the spirits. Oh yeah, go talk to Grandma Nell because she does that too. And then you get the training in-house kind of thing. And some families just don't talk about it, but they kind of, it happens.
It's still being passed down by learning. I have a friend who had a Kundalini awakening. And it was an unintentional Kundalini awakening. He wasn't practicing Kundalini yoga. It just happened to him. And he came out the other end of that and said, I know stuff I didn't know before.
Yeah.
I had no stuff I did not know before.
I'm so glad you mentioned the Kundalini awakening. It's one I had forgotten about, but it exists as well.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating as well. And he described it like shots of electricity going up his spine for hours, and like, having like a full-on body experience, and then just being exhausted, spent, exhausted, done, sleep for a long time, get up the next day, and it's like everything's different. I know things I didn't know before, and I don't know how I know them. It must be just such an unnerving experience. But I mean, it's hard to say what brought that on for him. And I think from what I've read about it, which is limited, it can be induced through several different ways. I think the traditional way is through Kundalini yoga with a yogi, as you would do like a shamanic journey with a shaman. You do a Kundalini journey with a Kundalini master. But then it can also happen to people randomly out of the blue, and it seems that creativity plays a bit of a role in it as well. It seems to be quite often happening to people who are bursting out in creativity, and then they can have a Kundalini awakening happening quite around the same time. It's fascinating.
It really is. There's an artist I know of who channels their work.
Oh yes.
So they get instructions on what to do. They pretty much get instructions, and then they are the I don't want to belittle what they do because it's amazing, but it's almost as though they're the technician. And they get all the instructions, they channel all of that information through, and then they create the thing. So that is one form of creativity. A different form of creativity is when you feel the flow and you ride that sword, that sword sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? You ride that beast, that wildness, that
Beautiful unicorn of creativity. That's what you ride.
Brilliant. You're off kind of thing. And when you are connected with those sorts of flows, I mean, when you think about the kinds of activities that we do that bring positivity through into the world. So this could be a hospice nurse, a surgeon, a counsellor, a therapist, a support worker in a school who's just got this really good act with kids. There is something that flows through that is bigger than just being human. And those of us who experience it know it. We're not making this shit up. And when you've got that kind of creativity coming through, or that kind of positive, love-driven work or care-driven work, it's almost like you're inviting these flows through. And some of them are maybe bigger than your storm drains can cope with. And you get quite thoroughly cleared out.
That's quite a good way of looking at it. And I wonder if the same kind of thing is happening when people have psychedelic experiences and open the mind in a different way. Because it is, from what I've read about, different ways of waking up, of discovering self, of, however you want to refer to that process. It seems to be that the psychedelics, what they do is to accelerate an already naturally occurring process. So
my understanding.
Please do.
Thanks. My understanding of it, I was just talking with a colleague the other day about this kind of thing, is that certain substances take off the inhibition in the brain, in the mind, in the body. They remove certain types of inhibitors. So normally humans wouldn't experience it because they're kind of filtered. But take those filters away and you experience the things that are flowing through. You experience much more of your experience than you would normally do. To tie it back into giftedness and sensory sensitivity, I wonder if we just don't have the filters that other people do. So
I wonder that too.
It's like the limits, the restrictions, the blocks, the brakes are taken off. And one of the frustrations of being gifted is having to put the brakes on, and you're always or very often slowing down to keep up with other people. One of the things about...
I was going to say as well, LSD is particularly, and is documented as being the only drug that actively builds new neuron pathways where neuron pathways wouldn't previously exist.
That is so cool.
I have had experiences when I was a lot younger and I was in my 20s and I was an idiot and I took LSD because I wanted to see pink fluffy elephants flying out the wall and all that kind of stuff, And I didn't respect the drug, and that's another story. But during these experiences, I had times where I could hear my friends' thoughts, and we could talk to each other without moving our lips, and we knew exactly what was being said, was being communicated, was being done. How the hell do you explain that, other than that must be a neuron pathway being built there that didn't exist before. But you mentioned before, people who are gifted have this ability to communicate between each other without speaking. And it goes back to what you said just now, is like filters. How many of these filters do we have on ordinary everyday life that would prevent these connections from happening anyway?
Absolutely.
Is it maybe just that the brain develops in a certain way differently to other people's, that it's there? Is it genetic? What is it? It's so fascinating to work out what causes it,
I think an interesting parallel here is language. And when babies are born and infants and toddlers, when they acquire language, they get immersed in this sound of the sounds of their language. Now, I lived in the Netherlands for 8 years, and there are some sounds that just don't exist in Dutch, and some sounds that just don't exist in English. So they're difficult then for Dutch people to pronounce the English sounds and for English people to pronounce the Dutch sounds, which is where foreign accents come from. It's this inability to do this.
Absolutely.
Now, there's nothing different about your facial vocal structure
No.
when
No.
you're born,
Nothing.
but you're just immersed in the sounds and shapes and muscular and phonetics of your language.
Mm.
And so that's what you know. And I wonder how much is like we just immersed in this culture, we're immersed in the way we think of and approach life. And that shapes us as much as I was on a roll, wasn't I,
You
with
were on a
language
roll. I know. Yeah.
and the vocal shapes. And I think that shapes our brains, and we could go down this gorgeous rabbit hole of language and how we understand the world through language. And living in a different country for 8 years and learning Dutch while I was there, it was lovely when I spoke to another gifted person about my experience of living, because they had the assumption of like, oh, I'm sure you're fluent by now, aren't you?
Wow.
Which is awesome to hear that as a gifted
Yeah.
person, because everybody else almost uniformly
Yeah.
says, oh, the languages, have you picked up any Dutch? How's it going? But the confidence and the affirmation of, you will have been able to do this, won't you? It is just gorgeous as I see you and what you're capable of in a like totally normal level conversation.
That in itself is your power as a counsellor for gifted and neurodivergent people in a nutshell. I see you, I recognize you, I understand you, and I accept you. That's the power.
And I'm not scared of you.
Oh yeah,
I'm not
that's another thing. Not intimidated by you. Yeah.
I can keep up with you. I am fascinated by you. I am curious. I think this is fabulous.
Absolutely. That's so beautiful to kind of approach in that kind of way. Do you know what I mean? When you haven't been approached in that kind of way in your life at all, it's lovely to have that kind of warmth and acceptance and
absolutely.
And to be accepted by somebody who understands you because they've lived a similar experience is so powerful in itself. It really is.
It's the gorgeousness of hanging around with other neurodivergent people as well, where we do the ADHD conversation thing. We just go off and explore different things and then pick up the threads and join it back to what we did before. And then you put a bunch of autistics together and you will learn stuff.
My God, yeah.
Because they have systematically, thoroughly rabbit holed the heck out of it.
Oh, haven't they just?
Listening to somebody talk about their special interest is just like being spoon-fed gorgeousness.
It lights you up, doesn't it? It lights you up. I have the same thing when I get somebody come in the counselling room and talk about something similar that I've been through, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I get you completely. I understand you completely. It's that sense of empathy and finding a sense of belonging.
Yes.
And when you're stuck in a lonely place, finding a sense of belonging is so important. I think so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that belonging is also something that really helps gifted people, I find, is to look at the numbers. To look at some of my clients, they're not just 1 in 100. They're not just 1 in 1,000. They're more like 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000. And if you scale that up, if you take the gifted people in the UK, we would not fill Old Trafford. Okay, we would not fill it.
Crazy.
There's not a lot of us. Okay, so finding each other, and then the kind of getting on with each other and being interested in enough overlapping things, which gifted people is not too difficult. I mean, it can be, but it's not always. Finding each other and coming together in like numbers that are bigger than 1.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good way.
It's quite hard, and sometimes because of all the things that build up for gifted people, there can be a lot of like unwanted inheritance, is what one of my Dutch friends calls it. Ongewenste erfenis, I think it is, but unwanted inheritance. It basically baggage, family baggage. And if you have a parent or grandparent who's gone through life as a gifted person hitting friction, they're going to have like awkwardness, not guaranteed, but they're gonna have something going on. Then that transfers into their parenting. The parts of them that weren't accepted as a gifted person, if they then have a gifted child, they see the gifted child, there's the whole resonance going on, there's the whole when they get what the adult didn't get as a kid, and all those kinds of dynamics, and it sort of passes through the family. When you start to understand yourself as a gifted person and how that affects you and your experience of the world, it changes your relationship with your parents, with your siblings, with your wider family members, if you're all genetically related, because you understand how the giftedness is playing a role in all of that. And on the spiritual side of things, it's very hard when a family doesn't accept the spiritual gifts of one of their family members. And
I think it's difficult for so many people with families in terms of being understood, the struggle to be understood. And for years we've heard words like, oh, he's just a bit special, or like little phrases like that. It's like people used to say about auntie suffering with her nerves. Auntie suffers with her nerves, and these days we say auntie has anxiety. And the language needs to change a bit more around neurodivergency, I think, as well as the awareness. I think the language around it needs to change. It's having a label is useful in some ways and in other ways not. But then I think the language that we use to describe around a label is the most important part. Usually,
absolutely. And it's the nuance around the label. So somebody may well be autistic, but totally not in the Rain Man way. Completely. And it's a bit like, flour. When we talk about flour, kitchen flour, we know what we're talking about, right? But talk to a baker about flour.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Is it this grade or that grade? Is it this or that? Is it, there's a list of flours.
To us, we just know 3 types pretty much: wholemeal, plain, and self-raising. Do you know what I mean? That's it. That's pretty much it.
Bit of bread flour if you go down the bread making.
There's a fourth one. What? I didn't know there was a fourth flour.
Sorry, mate.
Shocked.
You'll be keeping your eye out in the supermarket.
I will be. I've just learned something.
Where's that bread flour?
Yeah, I'll be looking for it.
Yeah, to get a nice dense loaf.
Thanks for the tips.
So, I feel like we're sort of running out of steam a little bit.
Yeah.
There's also something that's not quite
naturally like an hour and a half, but I kind of feel like there is something still roughing it. Where are we at time? We are about an hour and a half.
We're about an hour and a half. Yeah, I think it's something in this. I'm gay spotting. I quite often go up to that little spot. It's not my river behind me. I can see some wallpaper and a mirror behind me, and I quite often go up to that spot, and it's like
I do that a lot.
That's the power of brain spotting. I mean, have a session with somebody because it is good.
I'm intrigued by that.
Okay, this is random, but not random. It's like the amount of love that can come through. I think for me, therapy, counselling, whatever you want to call it, is very strongly related to how much love can we let through and express in this world.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. When we go into therapy, we process the shit out of the way, we bring our gifts through. That's love coming through and exhibiting itself in many, many different ways.
Because if you think about it, I've never thought about it in this way, and it's fascinating me already. As the counsellor, you are displaying an act of love by holding a session for a client. As a client, you are displaying an act of love for yourself by just turning up. So yeah, it is all about love. I'd never thought about it in that way, and that's just struck me straight between the eyes. Thank you, Sue. Oh, pleasure. Wow. Pleasure. That's gorgeous.
And it's also about allowing yourself to receive love from another human being.
Yeah. That's huge for so many people who have been traumatized as children. Huge. Yeah. Huge.
And that is what then fuels the process of if you, like your friend with the Kundalini awakening, and it's just like streaming through. I mean, that's a very extreme version of this, but it's like when you can allow that love to pass through you, it does things. And we can, I think this is why counselors are never going to go out of business, even with AI and all sorts of things, because AI, as far as I can tell, can't love. It can't tap into love. It can't channel love. It can't convey love, express love. It can't embody love. It can't vibe love.
No, exactly.
And,
You can try and fake it, but it wouldn't be real at all.
Yeah. And this is why it's so important when clients are gifted or ADHD or autistic or whatever is going on with their brain and their body system, that they can find somebody, not necessarily a therapist, but if they are a therapist, they've got the extra skills that can really vibe love with them on their, it goes in, faster and deeper. I'm all for the shortcuts here.
No, absolutely, yeah.
So when you have somebody that you can really resonate with in that way,
yes,
it has much more an effect. Now, there is a health warning here, because, all right, hanging around with somebody or people who are intuitive, awake, aware, awake at whatever level of capital or not, awake in the sense of personal, worldly, or spiritually. If you hang around with people who vibe like you, that's... I'm getting instructions to tell this differently. It's important. It's important.
It is important. I think you mentioned finding each other earlier on, and we all know when we found somebody who's a bit like us, we really do. And I think love is a beautiful way to end on. I think that kind of draws it up quite nicely for me. There's a million other things in my head I want to talk to you about, but I'm sure this isn't going to be our first and only podcast, Sue. So I've really, really, really enjoyed chatting to you today, and I hope you'll come back and do another one again, because this has been great.
It would be a delight. This has been a gorgeousness.
And if you are ever in Bristol,
ways.
You are welcome to the seat next to me in the studio. If you're ever up this way, you're more than welcome to come and sit in the studio. And I love face to faces. Yeah, absolutely. I know. So
let's make that happen.
Let's make that happen. Let's do that. Lovely to speak to you. And I'll give you a call later on. We'll chat off the air. But tell everybody your website and your socials and everything, how they can contact you and find you if they are looking for some help.
People can find me at SueMahony.com. Sue, S-U-E, Mahony, M-A-H-O-N-Y. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm fairly regular on LinkedIn. I'm erratic on Facebook and also on Instagram, but I am there. And you find me as Sue Mahony, PhD.
Okie dokie. Lovely job. We'll put all that down in the description for this episode as well. Thank you very much for joining us, Sue, and take good care of yourself. I will speak to you very soon.
Take care,
Cheers.
Rich. Bye-bye.
Bye.